So yeah, I think it would be good to start. So for today, as I mentioned earlier, we'll have two uh, talks, okay, the last of the required seminars for EEE 190. So the first talk will be from Dr. Franz de Leon on practical tips on technical writing. This will be useful when you write your proposal and your final documentation. And the last one will be on review of related work. So I'll turn you over to Dr. Franz.
Okay, thank you, Ma'am Jo. So for today, I'll present the practical tips on technical writing. I doubt that you can transform yourself from being a novice technical writer to being an expert after this presentation, because it really takes time and practice and even several courses for us to master that. Kaya yung nilagay ko dito is just practical tips, yung madaling i-apply sa context ninyo. So here's my reference for this presentation. Okay, to start, let me read this short passage. So the fundamental purpose of scientific discourse is not the mere presentation of information and thought, but rather its actual communication. It does not matter how pleased an author might be to have converted all the right data into sentences and paragraphs. It matters only whether a large majority of the reading audience accurately perceives what the author had in mind. So in short, we as engineers, as researchers, even if we are able to do our documentation, but if majority of our audience cannot interpret or understand what we have written about, then our documentation will just go to waste. So first, let us define technical writing. So yung pinakasimple dito is that technical writing is any written form of technical communication. Yung technical communication, hindi naman siya kakaiba sa atin. We have used technical communication. We've benefited from it in one way or another. So some examples include, number one, communicating about technical or specialized topics, such as computer applications, procedures, etc. Number two, communication by using technology, such as web pages, help files, or social media sites. And number three, providing instructions about how to do something, regardless of how technical the task is. So lahat ng ito, somehow either we've written about this or tayo nag-benefit as a reader. So the fundamental purpose of scientific discourse is not only to solve complex engineering problems. So tayo, as engineer, primarily we are problem solver. We use our technical knowledge to find a solution to a certain problem. However, no matter how great our solution is, if we are not able to translate it into a proper documentation or communicate it properly, kahit napakaganda ng solution or idea natin, then that whole work might just go to waste. So for example, you have this novel idea, you think it's worthy to be commercialized because it has a large potential, pero pag pinresent mo naman sa isang would-be investor, hindi niya magets kung ano yung pinagsasabi mo, then baka hindi mo makuha yung grant na gusto mo. So importante din yung technical communication for us. Now, what are some of the barriers to writing and reading? Number one, most people aren't trained writers. So sa atin, sa UP, sa EEE, ilan lang ba yung yung course na kinukuha natin which covers technical writing? Actually, hindi ko na nga maalala. So we are not really trained for that. So meron tayo, ginagawa natin, we write lab reports and some other reports for other course requirements. Pero it is not, maybe it is not as deep or maybe it is not at par to what is expected to a 198 documentation. So admittedly, kulang tayo ng training papunta doon. Number two, writing is a reduced form of communication. So ibig sabihin, di ba kapag when we communicate, we're able to highlight certain information. So kung oral communication ito, madali siya ipapakita kasi ituturo mo ng daliri mo, or you would change the tone of your voice to emphasize certain information. But with just writing, minsan nagiging challenge yun. And finally, the last challenge is to hold the reader's attention, lalo na kung makapal yung docu na binabasa natin. Minsan, first few pages pa lang, nakakataban ng basahin. In fact, one of the characteristics of a good documentation can be found by just reading the abstract. Sa abstract pa lang, sa amin, sa mga instructors, alam namin kagad, may sense na kami kung gaano kaganda or hindi kaganda yung documentation based on the abstract alone. So kung abstract pa lang, hindi na masyadong maganda, medyo masakit sa ulo na siya, medyo nakakatamad na siyang basahin. But anyway, we'll work on that. I'll give you some tips about that. So some of the things that you might consider or think about are, what are your personal challenges? Number one, what aspects of writing do you find difficult? And number two, what would you like to improve in your writing? Kumbaga, identify natin yung weaknesses natin sa ating sarili, specifically with regards to technical writing, and then we try to address them. So here's the proposed solution. So it covers 3 phases. Number one, phase 1 is before starting to write. Phase 2, writing clearly and concisely. And then the last phase is reviewing and polishing. Notice that these tips are not limited to writing your proposal or documenting your 198. So it can be used in other forms of technical writing, even emails, notes, reports, instructions, etc. So here's phase 1 before starting to write. Okay, there are many applications of technical writing. So first question is, what is your purpose in writing your technical document? First, is it to inform, meaning you need to write something and tell the people about the information about a certain event or certain process. Next is to persuade. You want to, let's say, persuade a school official to let you use a room for an activity. Inquire, you want to know whether the information you're waiting will be ready in time to use it in your proposal. Is it to explain? So you need to write a short report to explain why you took a particular decision. Other purposes include confirmation, instruction, and building relationships. Yung build relationships, ibig sabihin nun, you want to build a working relationship. No? So meron kang isang gustong ka-collaborate, and you can use technical communication to form that relationship. Now, in the context of 190, what is the purpose of your technical writing? So your main purpose is to write a proposal to persuade the reader to approve your, let's say, methodology in characterizing a device by the end of this semester. So notice that I've highlighted several parts. So number one, clear yung purpose. What is it that you want to achieve with your proposal? Number two, ano yung action? What's the action required by your technical communication? In this case, you want your reader to approve your proposal. And lastly, when do you want that action to happen? So in this case, at the end of the semester. So normally, kapag na-establish na itong purpose, then it becomes easier to write the overall action plan for your technical document. Next thing to consider. So next, after considering your purpose, you have to identify who are your readers. Siyempre, magbabago yung level or yung readability ng document depende sa intended reader mo. So you ask the following questions. Number one, what do they need to know? So what is of real interest to them, and kailangan ba talaga malaman nila lahat? Number two, how will they use this information? So will they need to reuse the information in a presentation or simply do what you ask for? Number 3, what are their attitudes to the information and to me? What is the impact of your writing? And lastly, what medium is used to read the information? Again, ilagay natin sa context ng 190 and 198. So you list down all your potential readers, what you know about them, and what they want to get from reading your document. So for example, your 198 documentation. So obviously, yung isang um, audience, isang malaking parte ng audience mo is yung iba pang students at EEE. So another student. So probably that student or your lab mate would want to know the methodology and how to repeat the work, as well as understand the results and conclusions of your work. So normally, halimbawa, yung isang project is a continuation of a previous work. So ang unang gagawin mo, halimbawa, meron ka isang project na katuloy ng isang previous project, hahanapin mo yung 198 docu ng previous researchers, and then babasahin mo siya. Next, your reader is your advisor who needs a record of the work to check its validity and to plan future projects. So yung advisor mo, he or she will ensure that what you've written is correct and adequate, and also based on the results, kung ano yung mga kailangan pang gawin para sa mga kasunod na projects. And third, probably kung mataas yung quality na nagawa sa 198, it can be submitted to a scientific publication. So normally, let's say may conference. So sa conference, ang binibigay lang natin is yung short version nung 198 docu natin. And in this case, normally ang sinasubmit ay abstract or extended abstract. For conference paper review, they only want a brief summary of what was done, the results, conclusions, and recommendations. So alam mo na yung purpose, alam mo na yung readers. Next is to plan the content and the structure. So take time to plan before you start writing. Mahirap, hindi magandang strategy yung kung ano lang yung maisip mo, saka ka magsusulat. Kailangan may structure muna. Alam mo muna kung ano yung overall picture ng gusto mong insulat, then before you put the right information. We do this because it makes the writing process easier and quicker. It will save you time in writing and editing. It can reduce queries and corrections. It will help you get your message across. And finally, it will give you something to test. Sa 190 at sa 198, meron naman tayong parang template na ginagamit for our proposal and as well as documenting our work. So ito yung normal na makikita natin. So we have the abstract, we have the introduction, we have a lit review, we have the methodology, the results and discussion, and then the conclusion. Dito sa figure, nasa huling acknowledgements, but for us, sa 198, normally nasa unahan yung acknowledgements. And finally, the references used in your work. So I'll give some brief explanation of each part of your report. Okay, first decide on a title. Normally yung title naman ng proposal, this is decided upon in consultation with your advisor. So normally yung advisor, he or she makes sure that the title of your work captures the main objective of your work, as well as give some sense of scope kung gaano kalaki yung project. Next, create a brief outline with only the main section headings. Ito madali to kasi meron tayong template. And then create a more detailed outline with subheadings, and then create your abstract. Now, once you have the skeleton, then you create the main body of the text, and then finally you insert the tables, figures, references, and acknowledgements. So we start off with the abstract. So the abstract, think of it as a substitute for the report of a BC reader. So kami normally, pag nag-evaluate ng proposal or ng 198 docu, abstract talaga yung una namin binabasa. So wag niyo siyang pabayaan, yung abstract. Malaki yung value ng pagsulat ng magandang abstract. If the abstract is well written, we will look forward to read your documentation. So the abstract, the length is never less than 3 sentences or longer than a full page. Normally, the length of the abstract is around 100 to 150 to 200 words. So how do you write the abstract? First, you expand on the title. Normal lang naman to. You expand on the title. Normally, sinasabi mo yung objectives or probably yung research gap. And then you state why your proposal is being done or why your 198 project was done. And then for the remainder of the abstract, you write the key results with numbers as appropriate, as well as the significant conclusions and recommendations. So yung abstract, siya talaga yung attention grabber para sa reader natin. The next part is the introduction, and this is not a substitute for the report. So dito naman dinidescribe mo, ano ba yung state of the art, and ano ba yung nakikita natin na problem, na research problem. So this is also the place where you will write your, probably your problem statement, and then the problem objectives. Next is the theory and analysis, which would include the RRL, Review of Related Work or Review of Related Literature. Si Ma'am Jo, mayroong talk about this later, as well as preliminary work. So ginagawa ito para ilagay sa context nung gagawin mo, base sa current work at base sa different approaches of working towards solving a particular research problem, nasaan yung proposal mo doon. So gusto mo ipwesto, nasaan yung gagawin mo. So that section will put your work in the right context. Also, kung merong important equations, theory, or concepts, ini-introduce mo na siya dito. Importante ito because later on, when you do your actual experiments and you've gathered your results, when you interpret your results, meron kang babalikan. Meron kang babalikan na explanation. So sometimes binabalikan mo yung equation or minsan tinatry mong i-rebut yung isang work base sa nakuha mo na data at analysis. The next part is the methodology. So this is where you describe the apparatus and materials and also the different procedures done or will be done in your proposal. And if this section is well written, so any other student or engineer should be able to duplicate your results. So that's one of the tests of whether your methodology is well written. Kung kaya niyang maulit, repeatable yung experiment na ginawa mo. Ibig sabihin nun, na-describe mo ng maayos kung ano yung mga parameters, equations, or settings para magawa uli yung resulta mo. After the methodology, so you will conduct your experiments and then you will gather your results. Okay, so dito sa results, meron tayong metrics na ginagamit which is appropriate for your work. And then based on the results, you will plot certain graphs or present the data in terms of tables. Please note that you should consider moving large quantities of raw data in the appendix. So normally, ang pinapakita lang sa main text ay yung highlights ng resulta mo. Okay. Methods of plotting which produce well-delineated lines should be considered. So more on this later in this presentation. And then, huwag kakalimutan, results should be critically compared to theory. Madalas na-encounter namin pag nagbabasa kami ng docu, nai-present yung table or naipakita yung resulta, merong graph, sasabihin lang, this graph shows something, period. So normally, after nun, matapos mong i-interpret yung result, kailangan lagyan mo siya ng detalye. Bakit kaya ganun yung na-observe mo? Siya ba ay expected or siya ba ay hindi unexpected? And then you follow up that, bakit kaya ganun yung nangyari? Okay. So in the results and discussion, you don't stop at merely reading the result, but you also have to interpret and discuss what you are observing. Kasi base sa resulta na ito, doon ka makakaproduce ng iyong conclusion. So the conclusion is similar to the executive summary. Basically, the conclusion answers the research objectives. Diba? Sa research objectives, naglista ka ng mga bagay na gusto mong makita sa result mo. So the conclusion will then, will try to answer those objectives. The conclusion must be concise and it should reinforce the key ideas formed in the discussion. And the conclusion will normally also include recommendations for future work, such as implementation of a design. Right? So again, sa amin, pag nagbabasa kami ng docu, ako personally, at least ang una kong binabasa ko palagi ay yung abstract at saka conclusion. Kasi doon ko agad makikita kung na-achieve ba ng work yung intended objective ng project. So importante yung abstract and conclusion. Now, with respect to figures and tables, ito tandaan, every figure must have a caption. So ano lang naman siya, short description of what is being shown. All tables must have a title. So hindi lang siya table 1, table 2, table 3. Meron din short description about what is being presented. Figures or tables are placed after they are mentioned in the text. And then don't start a sentence with an abbreviation. So normally you complete the term figure, hindi lang yung FIG tapos dot. Okay. So that's how you insert your figures and tables. And then next we have our acknowledgements. So keep track of those to be acknowledged. So in some instances, just write down, keep a diary of people that you want to be to thank for. So let's say your sponsor or other people who have helped you complete your work. And finally, we have references. So merong iba't ibang formats that can be adopted, but I think i-prescribes naman sa inyo kung alin yung tamang format na gagamitin for the references. You decide on a sequence, but normally we assign such that we put the reference in the order that they appear in the text. Yung alternative kasi in listing down the references is alphabetical. Alphabetical based on the surname of the author. But mas madalas ginagamit yung kung ano yung order ng reference na ginamit. Ganun din yung order. Kung paano sila nag-appear sa text, ganun din yung order pagkasulat sa references natin. Always give full references so that others may find them. So minsan kasi, pag nagbabasa yung audience, tapos pero kang sinite na reference, minsan may follow up yung reader na gustong gawin with respect to your text or may gustong gawin clarification. So ang isa niyang pwedeng gawin is to refer to your reference. Hahanapin niya, sino ba yung binabanggit niya dito? Tapos hahanapin ng reader kung sino yung author na gumawa nun. So matakot ka kung nagsulat ka ng isang reference, tapos hinanap ng reader, ay wala pala siya doon. So kailangan honest tayo sa reference na ginagamit natin. One important tip that I could give you is to use a reference manager. Okay, so for example, itong Mendeley desktop. So it would be easy to compile the different reference that you will use or you have for your work. And also it makes easier to insert the reference. And in some cases, yung Mendeley desktop, it allows easy insertion of the references used in the text. So ito, para sa akin, naging helpful itong application na ito. Okay, so this slide just shows you one of the accepted formats, IEEE format, in listing down the references. In this case, nililista siya not by alphabetical order, but by the way they appear in your text. Also, take note, we uphold academic integrity, so please, avoid plagiarism. So never take the work of others without giving proper credit. Never take verbatim sentences, and if you have to do so, do this sparingly. So there are tools that we can use to check how much of the work is plagiarized. So ayaw natin siyang gawin because number one, we are not respecting the work of others. And then you're also fooling your audience kasi hindi mo naman pala statement yung ginagawa mo, but rather from another researcher. So that's academic dishonesty. So disciplinary action may be taken or may be given if you do not obey or do not uphold academic integrity. Okay? So that's phase 1 of technical writing. So basically, alam na natin yung purpose, alam na natin yung reader, meron na tayong template ng structure kung paano isusulat, that we fill in all the information, and then what? So the second phase is writing clearly and concisely. Ito yung mga practical tips na dapat i-adapt ninyo. So sa phase 2, sabi dito, writing clearly and concisely. When we evaluate a 198 or 190 proposal, we do not evaluate on how thick or we do not base our grade on the number of pages. Hindi naman siya pakapalan ng documentation. Pag nakakita ako ng docu na 150 pages long, medyo kumukunot na ino ko. Ang haba naman ito, ang haba ng babasahin ko. So not unless the work is really big, there are significant information that must be inserted. Normally, hindi naman kailangan sobrang kapal ng document na pinapasa natin. Okay, so what are some of the ways to write clearly and concisely? Number 1, we take care of the jargon. Okay? Kasi ibig sabihin nito, if we insert jargon, yung mga highfalutin words or highly technical words, being too technical in your document will impede your reader. It means that, kung maging sinasabi mo sa docu mo, I don't care if you understand me because you're not part of my group, which is wrong. Maling perspective yun when we write our technical document. So to avoid problems with jargon, number 1, we use general terms as much as possible. We give clear definitions for technical terms, and if necessary, we provide a glossary. Example, for the first year, the links with SDPC and the HAC were not connected, and all required OCS input data were artificially loaded. Thus, Catch-22 and Merwin were not available. Naintindihan ninyo? For some, probably yes, but probably for most of you, hindi nyo na-gets kung ano yung sinabi ng statement nito. If we are to rewrite that statement such that most would understand, ito lang siya. Because some of the links in the computer system were not connected the first year, we could not run all the software codes. Diba? Mas malinaw, mas naintindihan ninyo kung ano yung gustong sabihin ng document. If you must abbreviate, define the term in the first occurrence and put abbreviations in parentheses. So tulad ng example natin dito. Or sometimes when there's some unfamiliar terms, we italicize first occurrence of unfamiliar terms and define them right away. Tulad nito. Okay. So pag nagawa niyo siya, in the latter part of your text, gets kagad ng reader when you are referring to, let's say, EGP, or referring to, let's say, in this case, retina, or other, probably more technical terms. So mas madali nang maintindihan kasi na-define mo siya sa umpisa pa lang. Minsan kasi ang ginagawa natin, nilalagay natin sa unahan, sa introduction, yung ibang technical terms without appropriately giving the right description. Therefore, nahihirapan yung reader na intindihin kung ano yung gusto mong sabihin. Next, simplicity. We use details wisely. So some specific details are desirable, but be careful to balance detail with audience needs for clarity. So mas importante yung significance. Example, the average house in the area has a radon level of 0.4 picocuries per liter. Kung tumigil ka dito sa sentence na ito, it doesn't make sense. So ibig sabihin, kung nasa text ito, bakit mo siya sinabi? Okay. Otherwise, pwedeng hindi mo na pala isulat itong statement na ito kasi wala namang explanation man lang bakit siya nandiyan. But if you've written this statement using example number 2, the average house in the area has a radon level of 0.4 picocuries per liter, which is considered low by the EPA, and so on, then nagkakaroon ng context yung information na sinasabi mo para sa kanya. So yung first case, too little information. Sometimes it happens na sobra-sobra naman yung information na binibigay natin, na nawawala na yung proper context. Bawa, the number of particular hydrocarbon combinations in our study is enormous. For example, the number of possible C20H42 is 366,000 something. And the number of C40H82 is 62 billion something something. In this case, over naman tayo sa detalye sa numbers. So to simplify, the number of hydrocarbon combination in our study is enormous. For example, the number of possible C40H82 is over 60 trillion. Trillion pala, hindi billion. Okay? So minsan, yung mga ganito information, hindi mo naman kailangan maging specific down to the last digit, but rather give a rough estimate. And then probably after this, you will write further details or explanation of the importance of that number. So again, use details wisely. Huwag masyadong matipid. Huwag din OA sa numbers na binibigay natin. Next, use simple words. Minsan siguro nasanay tayo, masyado tayong conversational sa pagsusulat natin or when we converse, na tinatranslate natin yung mga common phrases into technical writing. So remember, yung technical writing, we are concerned about specific details, factual details, as well as information. So instead of using the following common phrases we use conversationally, we could probably use the following terms instead. Halimbawa, at the present moment in time. Ilang words to? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 words. Pwede naman siya palitan ng now. Diba? Mas madali. Or throughout the entire. Pwede namang throughout. So yung mga ganitong words or phrases, obvious na nagpapahaba lang siya ng document. So hindi siya nakakatuwa. Okay? Also, we remove the following kinds of phrases. For example, at the end of the day, there's a rainbow. Okay. To all intents and purposes, or as a matter of fact, yung mga ganito again, hindi siya appropriate for technical writing. Okay? So we try to remove redundant words and phrases. Next, let's talk about sentence length. So try to read the following paragraphs and decide which paragraph is easier to understand. Halimbawa, itong first paragraph, the reason long sentences are hard to read is that your short-term memory gets overloaded before you reach the end of the sentence and you forget what was said at the start and have to go back and reread earlier parts of the sentence or start putting in additional punctuation such as commas to try to make it easier to understand. In one sentence, you have written 61 words. So ang problema dito, kapag ganito kahaba yung sentence natin, mahirap na siyang intindihin. Parang sasabihin mo, ano nga ibig sabihin or ano nga yung sinabi ng sentence na ito? So dahil masyadong mahaba, merong certain details na nawawala na. So instead, you try to break those long sentences into more appropriate lengths. So tulad nito. So in this case, the total word count per sentence is the following: 21 plus 20 plus 16. So again, okay lang na hati-hatiin natin yung long sentences into shorter ones to preserve the information. In fact, there's a metric that you can use to try to evaluate the readability of your text. We have what we call the fleshed readability test. So it is a certain metric, which is a score from this range, okay, let's say from 0 up to 100. And this equation describes how easy or difficult for the audience to read your work. So for example, for fifth graders, this is the typical score, 90 to 100. For college students, it's around 30 to 50. So this is the equation. So obviously, yung number na ito, magbabago siya depende sa ratio ng number of words to sentences as well as even the number of syllables to the number of words. Kung interesado talaga kayo dito, some word processing softwares like Microsoft Word, yung Microsoft Word natin, meron siyang ganitong metric. Check nyo dun sa spellings and grammar na tool. Meron dun isang option about the readability of your text. So meron dun. So malalaman mo kung gaano ka-readable yung document na ginagawa mo. Next is including signpost words. Okay, so for example, if you try to read the first sentence, so skim nyo lang ng mabilis. Because there are no signpost words, parang fragmented yung text natin. Okay? Kulang sa fluidity compared sa second text natin. So the signpost words signal what is coming next and help your readers to interpret the meaning of the text para may continuity between adjacent sentences. So these are the common signpost words that you can use for your work. So and, but, as, however, therefore. So again, nakakatulong siya para mas fluid yung pagbabasa ng text ninyo. Now, there's also some question kung what type of voice you would use for your work. Yung dalawang recommended na gamitin ay either you use first person, active voice, and past tense. Past tense kasi supposedly nagawa na yung work, or use third person, passive voice, past tense. So if you are going to apply the following rules, among the 4 sentences that we have here, alin yung sumusunod sa recommendation? Sentence number 1, sentence number 2, number 3, or number 4? So base sa recommendation natin, the third and the fourth sentences are recommended. Yung third ay, the gallium arsenide substrates were cleaned by boiling in trichloroethylene. While yung fourth sentence natin ay, we clean the gallium arsenide substrates by boiling them in trichloroethylene. Between the two, it is said that the active voice, yung sentence number 4, it is more straightforward, natural sounding, and stronger than passive voice. Now, paragraphs. Simple lang naman yung rule sa paragraphs natin. Simula nung grade school, tinuturuan na tayo kung paano magsulat ng paragraph. So ito yung simpleng rules natin for paragraph. There should only be one idea per paragraph. Diba? Meron tayong key sentence. Normally, yung key sentence nasa unahan ng paragraph natin. So the first sentence contains the main idea, and then the following sentences would expand to support your main idea. In fact, merong speed reading. Again, ano to pag nagbabasa kami ng document ng mabilis, kung gusto namin mag-speed reading, we should be able to understand the main elements of your document by reading just the first sentence of every paragraph. So, babasahin namin na mabilis, titingnan lang namin yung first sentence. Okay, kung maganda yung pagkakasulat ng docu, then meron kaming rough idea of what you've done by just reading the first sentences. Now, regarding pictures, diagrams, and photographs, we label illustrations for cross-referencing. So for example, figure 1, figure 2, table 1, table 2. We provide an explanatory title or caption. We use simple bold diagrams with clean lines. So madaling intindihin. Yung picture, if necessary, kailangan i-adjust yung size. Huwag masyadong maliit, huwag din masyadong malaki. Tama lang to show the appropriate detail. Adjust the contrast for optimum clarity. And then if possible, compress the photos before inserting into the text para wag masyadong lumaki yung file size. And finally, check and respect copyright. So we keep the illustrations simple and clear, and then we consider the visibility of color images when copied in black and white. With respect to tables, again, we use explanatory headers. Nilalagay natin siya, halimbawa table 1, tapos results of a certain experiment. I-avoid natin to. Fully lined tables may look too busy. So ayaw natin na mukhang checkered yung table natin. We also use bold text or color to highlight certain information. Normally, yung maximum, yung minimum, or yung mean, or yung average. And then kapag masyado tayong maraming data, we put large amounts of raw data in the appendices, not in the main text. Now for our graphs, again, lalagyan natin siya ng label, figure 1, figure 2. We put the appropriate title, and then kung bar chart siya, we apply label. And then we choose the scale to illustrate your key message. So yung y-axis and x-axis, make sure na tama yung range nila. And then write the appropriate legends. And then if necessary, we apply certain trend lines. In short, kapag nakakita ng figure, yung reader mo, even without reading the text, kaya niyang sabihin what the figure is trying to say, what the result is trying to say. Okay. Next, so suppose nakumpleto nyo na yung pagsulat, nailagay na yung lahat ng information, nailagay na yung, umabot na tayo hanggang reference. Ano yung last phase natin? Phase 3 is reviewing and polishing. Okay, so again, yung phase 2 is more about clarity and trying to write your document concisely. Yung last phase, reviewing and polishing. So first step, forget it. So minsan, kakasulat natin, kakakram in writing your document, masyado ka nakababad sa document that you will find it hard to spot your mistake. Okay? So what you can do is to set your work aside for a day, on overnight, or just a few hours. Okay, isang tabi mo muna siya, wag mo muna siyang isipin, and then tsaka mo siya balikan kapag mas refreshed ka na, para mas open yung mind mo to see the mistakes in your document. Next, check how concise your writing is. So write your document as well as you can, put the necessary information and explanation, and then try to do a word count. And then, if possible, try to edit your document by reducing the word count by a certain percentage. And then, try to read it again. After reducing, tignan mo kung nandun pa rin yung essential information na gusto mong sabihin. Okay? And then, try to make a note of some of the habits that you're frequently making. Minsan, maling use na isang word or maling punctuation, etc. Baka paulit-ulit mo na siyang nagagawa. And finally, you need to do proofreading. So pag natapos mo na siya, na-reduce mo na yung length niya, do a spelling and grammar check. So halimbawa, you're using a certain program or word processor, pag nakakita kayo ng kulubot, na pula or ng green, hindi siya ini-ignore. Okay? So kailangan mong tingnan bakit kaya hina-highlight yung certain words or phrases sa document. That must mean merong mali sa grammar or sa spelling ng ginagawa mo. If you have the resources, you can print out a draft copy and then try to find the mistakes line by line. Or you could probably read it aloud to a partner. Okay, check the proper names and terminology, and then look for consistent error patterns. Okay, and then try to, hindi mo naman siya kailangan gawin in one sitting. So take some time, a certain number of hours or days to do proofreading. And normally, chine-check din naman ng advisor yung document mo. So pabalik-balik naman yan. You do your first version, the advisor would give his or her comments, and then you would try to do the revisions until your advisor is satisfied. Okay? So ganito lang yung presentation ko. So those are just some of the practical tips on technical writing. So thank you for your attention.